Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's Education Joint Committee meeting. My name is Councillor Kamaljeet Nagpal, and I'm going to be chairing tonight because it's the council side's turn to chair. So we do have, I think, at least one new face, a couple of new faces, I think. So maybe we'll, and some new councillors as well. So perhaps we'll start with some introductions, and then we'll move on to the agenda. So I'm Councillor Kamaljeet Nagpal. I'm the Cabinet Member for A Fairer Start. Grace, do you want to go next?
Yes, good evening, everybody. Thank you, Chair. I'm Grace Quansah, Councillor Grace Quansah for Walpole Ward. Thank you.
Callum?
Good evening, everybody. My name is Councillor Callum Anderson. I'm a Labour councillor for South Acton Ward. Nice to meet you all.
Thank you, Callum. Who else is here? Sharon? Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Good evening, everybody. I'm Councillor Sharma, Perivale Ward.
Thank you. Greg? We can't hear you, Greg. Oh.
No, weird.
Oh, we can hear you now.
You can hear me now. Brilliant. Okay, Councillor Greg Stafford, Hanger Hill.
Great, thank you. And well, seeing as we're doing council side, we'll go to the officers next. So, Julie.
Evening, everyone. Julie Lewis, Director of Learning Standards and School Partnerships.
Thank you. Tamara.
Evening all, Tamara Quinn, Assistant Director for Schools Planning and Resources.
Thank you. Mark.
Yeah, good evening, everyone. Mark Nelson, Head of Schools HR Consultancy.
Great. Is that all of the council side done? Yes. Okay. So we'll move on to the union side. Stefan.
Stefan Sims, Ealing NEU District Secretary, and on your right.
Neetu Marley, I'm a teacher at Billy's High School and also Assistant Division Secretary for Ealing NEU.
Matt.
Hi, Matt Milovanovic, member of Ealing NEU Committee and also maths teacher at Norfolk High School.
And Dave.
Good evening, Dave Woods, NAHT Ealing Branch Secretary.
Great, thank you, everybody, and welcome. So on to the agenda. So do we have any apologies for absence or any substitutions?
Chair, if I may, I've received 2 apologies from Arwell Jones and Mandy Hudson of the union side.
Thank you, Jack. Any urgent matters? Any declarations of interest? Any matters to be considered in private? Okay, minutes of the last meeting. Can we approve the minutes, please?
Question.
Go ahead, Stefan.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, we're on accuracy. Matters arising from the minutes when you get there, Chair.
Okay. Well, we're on the minutes now, Stefan. So go ahead.
Can we have an update on the Teachers' Pension Index, please?
Sure. I mean, that's not on the agenda tonight, but
It's matters arising from the minutes.
Okay, fine.
Shall I go, Chair?
Yes, please do, Mark.
Probably the one. Thank you. Yes, so I think even we reported last time, most schools had managed to deal with this and had made a decision either to award a blanket award to all teachers of £1 or to go through the process of identifying who needed to have £1. Teachers' pensions, interestingly, right at the 11th hour, confirmed that for schools that missed the deadline, they could even retrospectively apply the £1 award. So we're fairly confident because we processed hundreds and lots of hundreds of £1 awards. So we're fairly confident, given all the information we provided to schools, and also the fact they were lobbied, I think, by all of the unions, we're fairly confident that all of those that needed to get that £1 increase got it.
Thank you. I have one other matter arising from the minutes, Chair.
Go ahead.
It's an apologies. I failed to send out our documentation around the menopause, and we'll be sending that shortly.
Okay, thank you, Stefan, and thank you, Mark. Okay, so can we agree the minute?
Thank you, Councillor.
Are the minutes agreed? I'm getting lots of nods, so
yeah.
Thank you. Right. So items 6, 7, and 8, these are union side items. And since the agenda was published, I understand that some of these items are going to be withdrawn. So just for the benefit of everybody here, would somebody from the union side just like to clarify which items are going to be withdrawn, and then we will proceed with these items.
All the items supplied are from the NEU. 1.5 of them are inappropriate. We're not in dispute. So the NEU does not have negotiating rights for support staff, and we are not in dispute over these issues at the moment, and therefore it's inappropriate to put it on. A bit premature to put it more concisely. So we need to withdraw the paid religious leave and also the aspects on pay regarding support staff, but keep the teachers' pay on there.
Okay, thank you, Stefan.
I've already apologised to Unison for the slip up.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so on to item 6, which is workload. Who's going to speak to this item?
I will initially.
Okay. Go ahead, Stefan.
There's a bit of an introduction. I think it's important to put some of this in context. We are asking for the local authority to look at ways to reduce workload in schools. We are in the middle, we're about to conclude at the weekend coming, a survey on workload, which we think will probably reach 800 teachers completing it. Other local authorities and Ealing in the past has attempted to tackle workload, but it's a many-hydra-headed beast because the workload for someone in EYS is different to someone at Key Stage 2, and it's different again from someone who teaches English, Maths or Science compared to someone who teaches drama or RE or arts in a secondary school. And then it's different yet again if you are in a special school and whether that special school is primary or secondary. But we have been able to, the survey has been produced in a way that we can track the answers for everyone in every particular key stage. Nottingham City tried to introduce a workload charter. It got introduced, but it didn't really solve the problem. Coventry also tried to introduce the charter, and whilst in both of those areas, some schools continued to adhere to the workload charter, it hasn't really been embedded. We too, in Ealing, with a number of primary head teachers, engaged with Ofsted to look at ways to try and reduce workload, but that didn't spread out. And since those attempts, workload has increased and has been magnified by the pandemic to proportions that now mean that a third of teachers will leave the profession never to return within 5 years. A quarter of them will leave within the next 2 years. The stress levels And I am looking at the results now. I don't expect the results to change much over the next 3 or 4 days. The results do show a difference between us and a difference between Ealing and the national picture in a number of areas. So what we are asking for, and we will share the survey results with everyone, so that both councillors and officers can have a look. And then we would like, and we are officially asking, that the Ealing Learning Partnership, Ealing Council, look at ways to adopt and have it at the forefront in the way that attainment and Ofsted outcomes are considered so important within Ealing, that workload and the mental well-being and the mental health and the work-life balance of staff is also held as a top priority, because it's been getting worse, and that's part of the problem that fuels the retention and recruitment crisis of teachers in Ealing and London and up and down the country in England and Wales. So we are looking for the local authority to work with us in agreeing a cap of a maximum number of hours. So for councillors, if you're not aware, there is something called directed hours when teachers must be in school, and that adds up to about 32.5 hours. And then there's all the extra planning and marking that teachers have to do on top of that. And we have the most workload and the most stress compared to any OECD country. We are the #1. We are top of the pops when it comes to stress and workload compared to any, and we are twice the average of the OECD in terms of workload and stress. So this is something that is particularly important, and we want to work with the local authority, with the head teachers, or we hope we'll get a positive engagement, that there is, as I said, a cap on the total number of hours, not just the directed hours, which is a legal requirement, but the additional hours that teachers have to put in so that they have a work-life balance. And that every school looks, using the DFE model, on how to cut between 6 to 10 hours of the working week for teachers. And this can be reviewed through working parties with a survey at the beginning and a survey later on in the academic year to see whether that has been achieved. If we do not address workload and stress and professional input into the workload, the retention and recruitment crisis is going to get worse, and that's going to be to the detriment of schools and to the children that we are all committed to. And therefore we are formally asking, I'm quite happy to have meetings with head teachers, with the local authority, but we want the Ealing Learning Partnership, we want Ealing Council to take this on board and work with us on this. Finished.
Thank you, Stefan. Officers, would you like to respond to Stefan, or shall I take questions and contributions? And I can see Matt has his hand up. I'll take Matt.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I just wanted to echo an awful lot of what Stefan's just said, and actually make a further point in terms of the importance of ensuring good work-life balance and mental health for teachers, for support staff as well, although we are specifically talking about teachers here. I always say to colleagues, and colleagues agree, that our best lessons are taught when we're happy and stress-free. Having worked in education myself for 7 years now, the marking and planning is, I don't think Stefan actually does justice in terms of how much it increases the number of hours we work per week. I'll say 50-55 hours is close to an average for a teacher. Taking work home, working over the weekend has been normalised. We're not paid for that time. So that is time over the directed time budget, which Stefan's discussed. It's very normal for colleagues to sneak in some admin work or some tick box exercise while the class is getting on with the activity in front of them. So they could just be getting on silently with the activity, and rather than our focus being them, actually we're trying to get some work done in that time so we can have some life at home in the evening. So I really think it's important for councillors and officers to consider this also from a child's perspective, as well as a teacher's perspective, as well as a recruitment and retention crisis, as well as keeping that consistency with the relationships teachers and children builds. Actually, we do our jobs better if we are happy, if we're stress-free, if we're given the time to do it. So I really strongly urge that the council side consider this. The survey also looks into, asks members to work out on average how many hours a week they think they work and actually compare it to how much they get paid per hour. And I appreciate that's the next item on the agenda, so I won't go into that too much. But I do want to note that in 21-22, the London living wage calculated by livingwage.org.uk is £11.05. That's before the energy price increase. So for a lot of us, we're also thinking, is it worth the money? Is it worth the pay as well as the workload? So reducing workload will go a long way in helping us stay in education. So I just wanted to echo a lot of what Stefan said and also bring it from a child's perspective as well. Actually, they want happy, stress-free teachers in front of them because that's going to perform to the best of our ability.
Thank you, Matt. Nitu, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to. I'm a mother as well. My kids go to school in Ealing Borough, as it happens, and I just wanted to highlight one thing that I noticed when my child was in reception. And I don't work in primary sector; I work in the secondary sector. I've been working in Ealing for the last 14 years, so I've been in Ealing for a while, and a teacher for longer. When my child was in reception, at the end of reception, their books got sent home. And I looked at this as a parent, not as a teacher. And I was looking through his book, and every single page in his book, and I mean every single page, had a teacher's comment. So I said to my 4-year-old, can you read this to me? He said, no, I can't. I don't know what it says. So my question was, this teacher has spent all of this time on every single page, writing a comment on every single page of all of these children in these books, but my child can't read it to me. What was the point? You know, and for me, that was I was like, that teacher's time has been wasted. And it felt like that teacher's time could have been used way more than just to write these, use other ways of doing it. So for me, it was like, why are they doing this? Is it just a tick box exercise so they have to show Ofsted or whoever that they're doing this process? Because it meant it was meaningless to my 4-year-old child. And that is an example as a parent. And now I have another 4-year-old who will probably come home with the same number of books with the same number of marking on there that she can't read to me because she's not fully able to read at the moment. She can read, but those words she couldn't, or he couldn't at the time. So I mean, it just highlights some of the issues that teachers are having. And I do see teachers in primary more than secondary taking suitcases home over the half term to mark books. And you know, I don't want my teachers and my child to be stressed, because I want my kid to get the best they can from the teacher that they've got in that, and I want their time to use to the best of their ability, and that's as a parent. So just wanted to highlight what I've experienced myself as a parent.
Thank you, Nitu. Julie, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. It's really interesting hearing both a parent perspective and obviously directly from Matt as a teacher. We know that in 2018, the Secretary of State wrote to all schools, to all their teachers, to ask them to address directly workload issues at that time. And it was following that the DfE published its toolkit that Stefan refers to. And there are some really useful tools there. And many schools took that on board and dedicated specific training days to evaluate how they could go about meaningful change, and some really innovative work came out of that. We know that Ofsted too have a focus now on looking at the extent to which leaders and managers are taking workload into account when developing and implementing policies. And so you know, I guess you could view that in a number of ways, whether that was a helpful addition to the framework or not. But I think what I want to come back to is the survey. So 800 teachers, Stefan, you say, have completed the survey. So I would certainly commit to reading the executive report, which I assume you will produce of that survey. And I also want to pick up your comment about a difference between the outcomes for Ealing teachers and national, and what exactly that difference is. Obviously, it's a shame that the committee hasn't had a chance to view any early report, so we don't have that evidence base in front of us. So I think if I could ask you to come back on those particular points. And you also talked about a third of teachers leaving the profession, so that's a national statistic. So again, we need to understand the local picture. I suspect that it's not a third in Ealing. We know that recruitment and retention is generally a healthy picture in Ealing schools. We know that our early careers teachers stay on in Ealing schools. So, you know, there's some good stuff going on as well. So I think we just need to really take a measured and analytical approach to this survey and the evidence that is revealed about our schools. And certainly you have a commitment, you know, from me and from the partnership, and I will be asking the recruitment and retention committee of the partnership to be looking at that executive summary, and then and clearly if there are huge discrepancies across schools, then with my other hat on, my sort of standards oversight of standards hat on, then, you know, I will personally commit to following up, you know, some of the key questions with those schools. So if you could perhaps come back on a couple of those points, that would be helpful.
Thanks, Julie. I'm going to bring Dave in because Dave hasn't contributed to this yet, and then I'll bring in Matt and Stefan again.
Thanks very much. So NAHT doesn't just represent primary school leaders, but the majority of our members are primary school leaders. And we also commissioned our own national survey in the autumn term. And so workload is not just an issue for teachers, it's also an issue for school leaders. So we had over 3/4 of school leaders reporting working regularly in the evenings, 68% reporting that they work every weekend, just under 2/3 reported working early in the morning before the start of what would be the day. Half had reported at that time that they had worked every single weekend since the beginning of September, and more than 46% said that they regularly worked after 9 p.m. every evening on issues. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that this is an issue that has been an issue in school for a very, very long time. It's an issue that has grown and grown. It's not unique just to teachers. It's also a leadership issue. And it's something that if we're going to engage in a discussion, we're not looking for some quick fix. We're looking for a longer term solution that's not going to pit school leaders against classroom staff. It's actually about finding something that works best for all staff in school, because actually our children in school deserve to have leaders who aren't overworked, and they equally deserve to have teachers who aren't overworked. And, you know, in some of the retention things also, there's some very worrying statistics too about the number of school leaders who wouldn't recommend anyone go into school leadership. It's knocking on around 47% wouldn't recommend school leadership as a career option for people. And that's just, you know, devastating for, you know, the future generations of school leaders. So what I'm saying from NAHT, we'd be happy to take part in discussions to move things forward. What we don't want to get into is a kind of us and them approach. We want to look for joint solutions that are workable across all areas of school employment staff, so that together we can tackle the problem.
Thank you, Dave. Matt, you want to come back in?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I just wanted to pick up on a couple of Julie's points. So just on the point around the workload toolkit from DfE, it's really good. I agree. And actually, when I was a rep at the Twyford Trust, I sort of presented it to Alice Hudson at the time, and she wasn't aware of it at all. And she was actually quite grateful to, I put that forward to her, so she was able to look at that. And that was quite recent. It was, I think, end of 2020, early 21. So I think it's actually worth saying that we want to have this toolkit and others as part of our sort of agreement. So using that toolkit to help us cap the hours, to help us reduce the hours in school. So we're very much in favour of this. I'm just sceptical as to how many head teachers and leaders are aware of it. I don't think many are, because every time I show this to a colleague or a rep or a school leader, from my experience, it's always been one of, oh, this is good. I've never seen this before. So I think definitely proliferating that toolkit and making everyone in Ealing aware of it is really important. I think that's certainly part of what we want to pursue from the union side. On the issue of turnover, I think turnover is a little bit lower in Ealing anecdotally, but in terms of us considering, like speaking as a young teacher, in terms of what we want to do in the next few years, I had a colleague a few months ago say to me, oh, I'm not sure I'm going to stay in this profession for the rest of my career because the workload's too much. And that's increasing more and more. I recently changed schools, and an interesting response I hear from the kids is, oh, why are all of my teachers leaving? And I think that's something you see in a lot of schools actually, and something that which Dave alluded to is something leaders don't have much control over. And I certainly support a joint approach, because as a teacher, I definitely value experience and helpful leadership. We need that. So I think it's something we do need to consider, because even if it's not coming up in statistics now, it's something that could come up in 5 years, especially I think there's an increase in secondary school numbers going up. So I just wanted to add to that. I'm certainly grateful that the toolkit's been raised, because I think that's something we need to talk about more and promote much more, as well as have some extra input on top of that.
Thank you, Matt. Stefan?
To respond and to reply, I don't doubt that it was innovating work in 2018, Julie, but workload has increased despite the innovations, and have increased significantly, as Dave has been talking about. And that's why I mentioned that there have been attempts both in Ealing and in other local authority areas to tackle workload, and it starts, but there isn't any meaningful change. We welcome you committing to looking at it and discussing it with us. We also want to see a commitment to a cap and a reduction in the schools of 6 to 10 hours per week. As soon as the results end, or as soon as we close the survey, which will be at the weekend, I'm more than happy to share that with you. And the one thing, whilst we have made the survey anonymous, Julie, we are able to follow it in terms of key stages. So if they're an EYS teacher, key stage 1, key stage 2, we can track their answers all the way through without obviously knowing who they are, because it isn't 800 at the moment. I predict it will be 800. It's on 735 as we currently speak. But I think by the weekend it will be on 800. I think in terms of looking at the results, I think you might be surprised that you said it's not a third in Ealing. I think it might be worse than a third, but I'll have to check and scroll through. I was trying to scroll through the survey as I'm looking at it on my other screen. I can't quite find it to say one way or the other. I agree with a lot of comments that Dave was saying, and agree. I think head teachers during the pandemic were hit particularly hard. The government was telling them to do something by the next day, and they told them to do something completely different the day after with very little notice. And as the NEU is the second biggest school leaders union, many of our members have said exactly the same things as Dave is saying. I definitely agree, Dave, when you say that the situation has grown and got worse. And we do want, if we can, we do want to work with you and the local authority in terms of trying to resolve this. So when you talk about working together, that's why I'm raising it. But I come back to the point that we are looking at a cap, and we are looking at schools on a school by school basis, because what is an issue in one school isn't necessarily an issue for the same school, even within EYS compared to one primary to another. So it will have to be resolved at a school level, working with school leadership using the DfE tool. Nonetheless, we are looking, as this is Ealing Council, we are asking Ealing Council to agree in principle to a cap and a reduction of 6 to 10 hours per week, every week, and that is then sustained. There are other aspects to it, and that's what we want to see, that's what we're asking, and that's what we want to work with both school leaders and the council in making happen. And
thank you, Stefan. Does anybody else want to come in? Can't see any. Oh, Sharon, go ahead.
I hear what you're saying, Stefan, and I've heard what you said as well, Dave, and Matt and everybody else, and I can understand where you're coming from, and I've heard what you said about the cap and so on, but I just wanted to kind of throw some light on some other things as well, basically. What I'm hearing is that this has been going on for decades, teachers being overworked and so on. It sounds to me like, you know, the ethos of the school and also the leadership and the head teachers, they also need support in finding ways to move forward to resolve this ongoing issue that's been there for years. And one of the things I can't help wondering about is that, I mean, Stefan, you said that, you know, England has got like a worse record in comparison to other countries. Now, do we have like a study of some other countries and the kind of approach they take? I mean, so it seems to me that like some other places, they have less paperwork, so they're smart about how they work. They use a common sense approach. I mean, the kind of example that Nitu gave just now, I mean, you know, common sense didn't seem to prevail with those sorts of activities. So, you know, I can't help wondering, you know, what is it that we're doing wrong in England in comparison to other countries, and they're doing far better than us? They have less paperwork and the kids seem to be making less progress. I mean, are there some models that we can kind of look at and try and help us move forward? Thank you.
Thanks, Sharon. Callum, you've got your hand up.
Thank you. Thanks for the discussion. It's been very interesting. I mean, I certainly echo Sharon's question about, are there other good models? You know, maybe in Scandinavia, for example, I know seem to have very good kind of models there, which we perhaps, you know, be interested to know if we can learn there, or understand whether we can learn from them. You mentioned the workload charter that had been kind of trialed out in a few places, but hadn't appeared to have kind of embedded or kind of taken with that area, whether it be the staff or whoever. I'd be interested just to understand a bit more about why that was, and whether you've kind of received feedback from your colleagues in those cities and towns about why that was the case. And then on the cap, sorry, just to kind of, again, for my own understanding, what would I understand that you're kind of wanting to cut it by 6 to 10 hours, but it'd be good to understand what level is you bring in the capped. You know, what is the proposition for the cap, or how many hours? And then also kind of to follow up from that, again, is there kind of evidence that the cap would actually work in kind of enhancing work-life balance? And actually basically the objective that you're kind of very understandably setting out is, again, is there other jurisdiction, be that in cities in the UK, other countries where actually implementing a cap has actually had the desired effect, and that people actually, you know, staff actually kind of pay attention to it and adhere to the cap. And then again, my final question, picking up on what Sharon was just saying, are we as a borough kind of maximising the use of whatever technology we can leverage to help teachers undertake, you know, administrative tasks, rather than it all being kind of paid pen and paper, so that they can kind of obviously not only reduce their work, perhaps work a bit smarter, but also obviously make sure that they're dedicating as much of their attention to teaching and our young people in the borough. Thank you.
Thanks, Callum. Greg, you've got your hand up.
Yes, thank you, and forgive me. I'm a relative newbie in terms of knowledge of the education system, so forgive me. But I think I want to echo a number of things. Whilst this discussion has been, I think, useful, certainly useful for me to understand some of the issues, I think what I would like to see is some empirical evidence of the issues that you were talking about, because even the survey that you're talking about is in some degree anecdotal rather than empirical. So I would like to see some studies that have been done. For example, you mentioned our ranking in the OECD countries. It'd be interesting to see that, which I assume would be relatively empirical. I also, when we get to the cap, I assume it's not legally enforceable. So I would want to understand, what that would mean, really. Second of all, you've talked about a 6 to 10 hour reduction in time. What you haven't really discussed is that's a 6 to 10 hour reduction in teachers doing something, and you haven't talked about what that something that they wouldn't be doing in those 6 to 10 hours would be. So I think there was one example of marking, and I again, as a relative newbie, but as a father of 2 school-aged children, I think I would be worried if marking was one of the things in those 6 to 10 hours that were being cut out. And also, I think we also need to understand, it would be useful for me to understand what the working hours looks like over the course of a whole year. Because whilst I would this is again from a layman's point of view, I can see that during term time there will be an obvious peak of work. During the school holidays, one would assume that those hours would reduce somewhat because you're not physically in the classroom, for example. So it would be useful to understand that study not just based on the term time, but across the 365 days of the year, where I would guess there would be more of an evening out of workload compared, if you're benchmarking it against other professions or something like that. So again, it would be useful to see those comparisons. And I can see Stefan shaking his head. If that's not the case, then it'd be useful to see the evidence, the empirical evidence of that, so we can make an understanding. That'd be helpful for me, certainly. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. Right, Stefan, do you want to come back in, and then I'll let officers speak, and then we might draw this item to a close.
Sure. Responding to Councillor Cannon first, we're also, the NEU is very much a big fan of Scandinavia, in particular Finland. It always comes out very high in the PISA results, and what they do and what they don't have exams until 18. So you ask why. For the NEU, the biggest driver for local authorities, for head teachers, is Ofsted, and it is so unfit for purpose in terms of what it does and what it's supposed to do and what it doesn't do. So if we get rid of Ofsted, a lot of what we're talking about would have been significantly resolved. In terms of how it would work, working with school leaders, and this partly comes back to what Councillor Gregory was talking about. For this to work, it will require working, I believe, but I'm open to other suggestions, working parties between school management and the school NEU group, because there could be a discussion using the DFE model in terms of what has the least positive impact in terms of attainment of the students, and compared to the amount of work. And that, I'm quoting the DFE here. So we would want to look at what are teachers being asked to do that have that professional discussion. What are we being asked to do that doesn't actually make any difference to the attainment of the students? Now that there should be, in all of this, some low-hanging fruit, and they're the areas where I think it can be, where I hope the hours can be found. It may also produce quite an interesting discussion between senior management and classroom teachers. Classroom teachers might think doing X is a waste of time, which won't be strongly or quite heavily opposed by management. If so, then the question then comes back, well, if that's not to go because that's important, what else should go in its stead? But that's a conversation, a professional conversation amongst staff in each and every school, we particularly need it being taken up on board by Ealing and encouraged and adopted in the Ealing Learning Partnership, so that it is promoted in the way that we jump through the hoops for Ofsted. We're proud about how many schools are good or outstanding. I want to see that happening in terms of mental well-being, work-life balance. And in terms of, maybe I've misunderstood you, Councillor Gregory, but empirical evidence, as a rusty science teacher, as Matt will be quick to point out, 800 teachers responding to a survey is empirical evidence. And there is also a national survey called the State of Education, which the government commits. And I think we should compare our survey to the DFE survey. That is indeed empirical evidence. And one particular point, because you said it evens out because of the summer holidays. Please understand, Councillor, we don't get paid for our holidays. If you want to know the average wage that we get, if you add up all our hours, and I'm just going to scan through it, so I'm going to ask people to be patient with me whilst I try and find the amount of average hours that we do and how much we get paid. Typically, my members earn £15.50 to £16 an hour. They're qualified, they've got degrees, and yet they're still earning on average, the largest response, which was 34%, they're earning £15 to £16 an hour. Because when you talk about, because we don't get paid during our summer holidays, our wages are spread out over the whole year. We only get paid for the days we actually work, but it's spread out over the year. And if you then add in 50 to 60 hours a week, we are earning between 15 to 16 pounds on average. That is part of the problem. Pay, workload, stress, professional accountability, professional input. These are the things that are driving. It isn't just the workload, it's the fact that the teachers don't have professional input into what is being asked of them to do.
And sorry, can I just add one more thing? Councillor Callum, you asked how could this be implemented in schools, and an example I can give is giving teachers or people with TLR or responsibilities and a way to actually take charge of what they're doing. So in my department, I am a head of department for design technology. My subject is a practical subject. Writing something down to give them feedback doesn't work in my subject. My subject is a hands-on subject. I give you feedback, you act on that feedback, and you actually do that. At that moment, immediately, you work on that feedback in a practical sense. So what I did in my department is I was given autonomy to set my marking policy. A lot of our teachers' issues are coming from the time that they're spending on marking. I have been given the autonomy to change my marking policy in my department to cater for the needs of my subject, which is a practical subject. That has allowed me to minimise and take away a considerable amount of time that my teachers are spending in my department are spending on marking, because my subject requires immediate and constant verbal feedback, which then the kids react on and then work on. So that's just an example of how. I've also wanted to explain to Councillor Gregory a typical day for me, a typical working day for me. On a Wednesday, I start my day starts at 7:15 in the morning. I have interventions where I have the kids coming at 7:15 to 8:15 on a Wednesday morning. I then teach up until lunchtime. I then at lunchtime have a club, a Lego club, where the kids can come and play. That's out of my own. That's not paid time. That's my lunchtime that I'm voluntarily giving up. I then teach to the end of the day, and at the end of the day, I may have to teach an extra further 2 lessons of A levels because our school's not big enough to cater for it to have after school lessons, or I have to then attend meetings till 4:30. And that is a typical day. That's a typical day for a secondary school teacher. That might differ from one day to another by a period here or there, but it is a busy and it is very hectic, and the amount of time that you get on there, preparation time is non-existent in comparison to the number of lessons that I teach. A typical teacher teaches 26 periods, and we get 3 periods to prepare. That means only 3 periods to get the lessons ready, 3 periods in which we have to get to mark, only 3 periods on the timetable to do all of those things. That's not physically possible. Hence why we're having to do more in the mornings. I come in extra early so I can mark in the mornings. I come in extra early so I can prepare my lessons. Mine are practical lessons. It doesn't just mean practical preparation, computer PowerPoints. It means preparing my room in the morning, preparing my materials in the morning. It means that I have to be in advance ready for the day. So there's a lot there with only 3 periods that you get given, just to give you an idea of.
Thank you. Right, Grace, you've got your hand up, and then Julie.
Thank you, Chair. Just a small point or question on top of what's been said already, which echoes with me, but the impact of the use of digital work, and also having to do increased online, sort of like interactions, and the stress when things go wrong. I just wonder if that's come into any of the research, because I think that within the pandemic and post-pandemic era that we're in now, I want to know whether you've had to also consider the stress factors that happens when you're using, more digital, sort of like work and planning, and when things go wrong, and whether that has come into your studies at all, or yeah, that's it.
Thanks, Grace. Julie.
Thanks. I was just wanted to bring committee members' attention to back to the learning partnership, and to say that we've just been selected to take part in a national pilot, one of 3 education partnerships nationally, to take part in a pilot that really shifts the culture from a prevalence of teachers and leaders constantly having to prove themselves to external bodies, to parents, and that kind of culture within the country, leading to an excessive amount of reporting, which is of course one of the things that has been a criticism of the system for a number of years. So we're about to launch a pilot where we're going to use our existing structures. So, for example, all our primary schools are linked in learning triads, and we're going to move from what has been a fairly well-established peer review model to a collaborative inquiry model, and shifting the notion of responsibility and accountability to one of accountability and responsibility to one's colleagues, one's fellow teachers in school, but also in the school down the road, or the school right across the other side of the borough. So we're going to use the structure of the learning partnership and the collaborative triads that have already been set up to really try to give both leaders and teachers a bit of space to think less about proving what they're doing, to thinking about really what is the body of evidence saying about what is leading to improvement in the experience for children in schools other than their own. And actually, I think that workload, all the questions and issues that today have been flagged about workload is part of that collaborative inquiry. Having worked in this sector for many years now, for teachers to be given that opportunity to shine a light on what is really making a difference for that child, and articulate it, and have the opportunity to do that, can be an absolutely enlightening experience, can be taken back and grown in other contexts. And I think we've got to kind of open the doors to professional learning in ways that I think we haven't done enough of. So I just wanted to flag that pilot to say that we are going to launch a new collaborative inquiry model across schools. We're going to start with primary and then move into secondary, and particularly with subject leaders in secondary. So I'm really happy to come back and report more on that further down the line. I think it will help us to imagine ourselves as perhaps not Finland, but a little bit more Nordic, and perhaps a little bit less English in terms of our kind of prevailing mindsets that have been established so far.
Thanks, Julie. Grace, you've still got your hand up. Is that a legacy hand? Okay, great. Right, thank you all. That's been a really interesting discussion there. I think what Stefan, I would say is that we could bring this back to the next Education Joint Committee meeting when you've had an opportunity, when your survey is closed and you've had some opportunity to analyse all of the results and prepare a report. It would be good to see that and to see what, if there's an issue in particular schools in Ealing, if what the report says, what the analysis of your results says. It would be good to see that. And yeah, you're welcome to bring it back to the next meeting.
The next meeting isn't until next term. We would like to see more progress before the next term, and the results will be concluded by the end of this weekend, and I hopefully will be able to share them with you by Monday, broken down into different key stages, and therefore I'm hoping to have meetings to discuss what I've just flagged up, and I note your answers, but I haven't had a yes, so I'll be looking for a more positive engagement within the next few weeks, not next term.
So Steph, you said does the survey close this weekend?
It does, yes.
Right, okay. So, I don't know how long you need to do your data analysis and write your report, but I'm happy to look at it with you before the next meeting. I just thought because all the committee members here tonight have really engaged with this, that they might want to hear about the survey.
And we'll be happy to do that too.
But yes, you're very welcome to share the survey with me next week if you'd like, but everyone's engaged with it really well tonight, and I thought everyone would want to see the survey results and maybe look at it again at the next meeting. Great, thank you very much. So the next item 7, is on pay. It says item for information. Who's going to speak to this item? Matt, Stefan, I've got 2 hands up. Are you both going to do it?
I could kick it off and then Stefan can just chime in if I missed anything. It's just more an information that we, as a Nationals Union, are moving towards an indicative ballot in the autumn term on pay. And this is because the cost of living crisis is too much for teachers. Just to give you a personal anecdote, from that survey we discussed earlier on workload, I calculated personally I'm getting paid £13.22 an hour. That is before, and the London living wage I mentioned is £11.09. That is before the increase in my energy bill, which has been increased by 143% in the past few months. So I reckon I could even be below London living wage as it stands. So this is obviously something which is affecting a lot of teachers. I'm actually on the highest point on the main pay grade as well. So actually the majority of teachers are even lower on the pay scale. So they work the same number of hours as I do. They could be as low as £10.83. So that's already below London living wage before the recalculation, factoring in the energy bills. So this is why we're taking it forward nationally. So we will have an indicative ballot in the autumn term. Just information for the committee here.
Stefan?
Matt has said all on that, and part of my answer to Councillor Gregory in terms of quoting the average wage that teachers do when you take into account all the extra hours they do over directed time. Question to add to this is that the TUC have called for a national demonstration on June the 18th over austerity and the cost of living. And I was wondering if the councillors are going to be on it. That's a week Saturday, called by the TUC against austerity and the cost of living crisis. And will the councillors be on it? If they are, you can march with us. I'm sure our members would love to chat to you on the march. No takers?
Well, I think I would normally be delighted to join you, but I think the Labour group of the Local Government Association has their conference that weekend. So some of us might, on the Labour side, could be quite challenged. Some of us may be in Warwick, University of Warwick, that day. I'm very aware of the demonstration, of the rally.
Do any of the officers want to come in on this pay item? Mark?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm not going to comment on the issues around austerity and the difficulties that the whole nation is facing, because they're all very well documented for all of us to know. I mean, in terms of teachers' pay, we go through a process, and the other day I was discussing it with Councillor Nagpal, and we were talking about the process whereby the School Teachers Review Body seeks evidence and then provides recommendations to the Secretary of State, and the Secretary of State decides whether he will or won't accept those recommendations, and then we go and find what the pay award is. And one of the good guides, you can never tell quite what the School Teachers Review Body will come up with, but one of the good guides is to look at the evidence that's provided to that review body by the Department for Education. Somewhat of an irony, if you like, because it's the Secretary of State who heads the Department for Education who gives the remit to the School Teachers Review Body, and then part of the evidence that they collect is actually from the Department for Education. But sometimes we look at what the Department for Education publish and we think that might be a guide as to what we'll get. So they've made their evidence public, and if we're to consider that it will come out anything like what Department for Education have suggested the pay award should be, it will be a 2-year pay award. It will, for Inner London, the percentage increases will range on the main scale for 22-23 from about 6.5% at M1 up to about 4% at M6. For the upper pay scale and leadership, it looks like it's going to be a figure of around 3%. Now, those are speculative, and those are the figures that the Department for Education has suggested to the School Teachers Review Body. And the only reason I mention them is because we've noticed in the past there's been a correlation between what the Department for Education have put forward in their evidence and what sometimes comes back from the review body. However, the review body is technically independent. I know some people may have a view about that. So they could decide that they won't go with, for example, what the Department for Education have published. They may come up with something else. It is going to be, it's suggested it's going to be a 2-year pay deal. The government have committed, they want teachers' starting salaries, so someone who comes in at M1, they want nationally for that to be a minimum of 30,000. And that won't impact on London because teachers in London already get a starting salary of 32,000. But it will impact other areas of the country. So what you might also find is that in areas of the country where teachers are paid less than 30,000 as a starting salary, the increases for teachers in those areas, so for example, teachers on M1, will be higher than what you would experience in Inner London in order to achieve that ambition by the government to get starting salaries up to 30,000 for all teachers. So it's likely that the awards across the country may end up being regionalised, and I'm just providing that, if you like, as a matter of fact. The review body was supposed to report at the end of May. It didn't, because it's still working things out. And our information is that they'll probably report to the Secretary of State in the next couple of weeks, which delays things like the publication of the pay and conditions document because of all of the other mini consultations that have to take place. But the Secretary of State will receive the review body's recommendations, and then he has to decide, hopefully within a relatively short timescale, what he's going to agree and what he's going to pass round to various parties and say, this is what I intend to recommend for teachers' pay for this year and next year, because remember I said it's going to be a 2-year award. So that's more just about a factual thing of where we may end up, or and roughly how long it might take to get that information through. That's it.
Thanks, Mark. That's really helpful. Matt, you have your hand up.
Yes, thanks, Chair. Thanks, Mark, for that information. It's really useful. We're just working on sort of your analysis. My understanding that, and this is something that's come from the union side as well, that the pay increase will range from 6% to 3%. And I know Dave Woods is comment in the message as well. Actually, that means every single teacher and leader in Ealing, because we're in London, will have a real terms pay cut because RPI is 9%. So I just want to stress that. That's why, as then we all have an indicative ballot. And I'd also want to go back on the issue of workload. If we take that seriously, that would alleviate a lot of the issues that the teachers and leaders in the borough will have from this. If there is a better work-life balance, it might alleviate some of the issues around pay. So I think these two issues are linked. These two issues are two issues we need to look at simultaneously, but also distinctly. So I just wanted to make that point, and I want to thank you again, Mark, for running through that with us.
Thank you, Matt. I don't see any other hands. Stefan, just on the march you mentioned, I think if you send around the details by email, then maybe members of the committee can have a look at their diaries and see if they have availability on that day. And I'm sure some will definitely join you.
Saturday noon, June the 18th, week Saturday, Central London. Hang on a minute. There you go.
Great, thank you, Stefan. Okay, so
on agenda item number 9, please, Chair, can it be physical?
yes, so I was just going to work through. So number 8, paid religious leave's been withdrawn. Number 9, date of the next meeting is the 15th of September. And yes, absolutely. So for this meeting, I was asked the question, did we want to do it virtually or did we want to try and organise a hybrid? But I was only asked that question last week, so it was a bit last minute to try and organise hybrid. But certainly for the September meeting, it would be great after all of this time doing virtual meetings if we could all meet in person. So yes, definitely.
Excellent. Thank you.
Great. That brings us to the end of the meeting.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Pleasant evening.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you, Chair.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good evening. Bye.